Right now, a North Texas woman seeking an abortion has left the state to get the procedure, and President Joe Biden has weighed in on the case. The filing deadline for candidates in the 2024 primaries is coming past. We're going to have a look at how the big races are now shaping up. Plus, is Texas headed for a recession? You're going to hear from Texas Comptroller Glenn Hagar about his projections for the fiscal cycle. Hello, everyone. I'm Ken Molestina in for Jack Fink this week. Get your fix for Texas politics. Eye on Politics starts right now. Hello, everyone, and welcome. I want to begin with a Texas story that's making headlines around the country. A Dallas woman left the state after the Texas Supreme Court blocked her for having an abortion. She says her fetus was diagnosed with a rare and deadly disorder and that the pregnancy put her life at risk as well. In Texas, all abortions are illegal except to save a mother's life, but critics have continually argued that the law is just too vague and that doctors' hands are tied. The Texas Supreme Court is ruling against Cox, but the court's opinion is leading to some questions now about what's legal and what is not. Andrea Lucia dives into all of it for us.
The court, to be clear, didn't say Kate Cox can't have an abortion in Texas. It found that it's not the job of the courts to decide that in advance. A pregnant woman does not need a court order to have a life-saving abortion in Texas, the state Supreme Court wrote in an opinion released Thursday.
Now, the Supreme Court here said we're not going to have courts getting involved on the front end, trying to give guidance before something happens.
Legal expert David Cole says the court found it's up to a doctor to use reasonable medical judgment to decide whether someone has a life-threatening physical condition that makes abortion necessary. But it also wrote the law requires more than a doctor's mere subjective belief.
So I think the Supreme Court is saying, you have to make a judgment call, but at the end of the day, somewhere, somehow, you may have to back that up. And simply saying it was my judgment is going to be a harder sell in court someday than something that's well-grounded in specific items of the record, specific things that came up in the person's medical history. It's a little scary, but that's just the way this law is written.
May it please the court.
The court heard arguments 2 weeks ago in a separate case involving women who say they were denied abortions in Texas. That case is seeking more clarity on exceptions to the state ban on abortions and could result in a similar but more in-depth opinion. The court did find that a woman doesn't have to be in imminent risk. In other words, she doesn't have to be within an inch of death in order to be able to get an abortion. It also said that the Texas Medical Board could step in here and offer some guidelines on when an abortion can be legally obtained. I reached out to the board and asked if it is working on that. I am waiting for a response. Andrea Lucia, CBS News, Texas.
Well, President Joe Biden also weighing in on the case. In part, he says no woman should be forced to go to court or flee her home state just to receive the health care she needs. He does go on to say, quote, the vice president and I will continue to fight to protect access to reproductive health care and to urge Congress to restore the protections of Roe v. Wade now so that women in every state have the right to make their own health care decisions. The legal fight over abortions in Texas, of course, certainly far from over. More women, not just Cox, have sued the state over its abortion laws. Back in March, 5 women sued the state saying they were denied abortions when their pregnancies endangered their lives. And just last month, the Texas Supreme Court heard arguments in a case brought by 20 women arguing the medical exemptions in the state's laws, again, are just too vague. Zooming out, the Supreme Court has agreed to take up a case that could restrict nationwide access to an abortion drug. That case concerns mifepristone, which, when coupled with another drug, is one of the most common abortion methods in the United States. The scope of the FDA's authority is at the center of the dispute. The FDA ruled the drug safe and effective more than 2 decades ago, but challengers argue the agency did not do enough to study the safety implications of the drug. The case could be decided by July. Monday was the filing deadline for 2024 primary candidates in the state of Texas. With the primary races finalized, we want to take you through some of the major races that we are going to be keeping a very close eye on. In the race for U.S. Senate, there are 10 Democratic primary candidates hoping to face off with Republican incumbent Senator Ted Cruz, and that includes current Congressman Colin Allred State Senator Roland Gutierrez, and State Rep Carl O. Sherman. Meanwhile, running to replace Allred in the 32nd Congressional District, there are 10 candidates running in the Democratic primary. They include State Rep Julie Johnson and Dallas Surgeon Brian Williams. U.S. Rep Sheila Jackson Lee is now running for her seat representing the 18th Congressional District again after she lost the runoff in the Houston mayor's race last weekend. She has two opponents in that race, and here's one announcement that you might have found surprising. Democratic Texas House member Victoria Nieves Criado is challenging Democratic State Senator Nathan Johnson in District 16. In a social media post, she said, "We need bold leaders who are not afraid to speak out, no matter the consequences." In a social media post on Monday, Johnson said in part, "From championing women's rights to making sure that you have power if the grid goes down, we've delivered significant policy wins to improve the lives of Texans and Texas families." In Dallas County, the former sheriff wants her job back. We're talking about Lupe Valdez. She was elected in 2004, but she resigned during her fourth term in 2017 to run for governor. She became the Democratic nominee, but lost the race to incumbent Governor Greg Abbott. Marion Brown was appointed interim sheriff following Valdez's departure. She went on to be elected twice and has held the office ever since. She tells CBS News that she believes she deserves another term.
My opponent knows why she brought me here, because she knew the kind of work that I was doing, that I would do, and when I became the sheriff, then that work was even more so expanded, and that's what we've been doing, is doing the work.
I've done this before. Success matters. Being able to do it matters. Leadership matters. Treating your employees in a decent manner matters. All of this is important, and especially who is leading the organization matters.
Election day in the Texas primary races is March 5th. The Dallas Police Department is also trying to tackle a growing problem with murders. While violent crime overall is down, murders and manslaughters are up. The department has counted 230 murders and manslaughters so far this year, and that's more than 10% of an increase from this same time last year. Dallas Police Chief Eddie Garcia telling council members during a briefing this week that overall violent crime rate is down 13%, led by a drop in aggravated assaults. He says that is an important metric.
The way you reduce murder is to reduce the incidence of aggravated assault that caused the murder. And the men and women of this police department are doing an incredible job.
Well, another point of improvement pointed out by the chief. He says robberies citywide are down compared to last year. He's being remembered as a trailblazer, a visionary, and a symbol of hope. Former Dallas County District Attorney Craig Watkins died this week at the age of 56. Watkins served as DA from 2006 to 2015. While he was in office, he pushed exonerations, and he became known nationwide for advocating for people imprisoned for crimes that they did not commit. CBS News Texas spoke with one such person this week, Richard Miles. He believes he would still be behind bars if it wasn't for Watkins.
I mean, DA Watkins started a trend that went nationwide. You know, nobody ever heard of a conviction integrity unit because we only looked at the DA's office as a place of conviction and not freedom.
Well, in a statement to CBS News Texas, current Dallas DA John Creuzot said in part, quote, "Craig was bright and ambitious, and for his life to end so prematurely is a tragedy. However, he leaves behind a powerful legacy." He made history as the first elected African-American district attorney in Texas. His fierce focus on the prosecution of child abuse cases and his creation of the first conviction integrity unit in the nation are testaments to his vision and ability to effect change. There's still a lot ahead here on Eye on Politics, including a conversation about high-speed rail in Texas. Jack Fink goes one-on-one with the program manager of the Metropolitan Transportation Plan at North Central Council of Governments about why a rail line between Dallas and Fort Worth is being considered. Plus, we're also hearing from the Texas Comptroller about whether our state is expected to experience a recession and efforts to minimize organized retail thefts. All of that coming up after the break.
Texas ranks 6th in the top 10 states feeling the most stressed by inflation, even though Texas is still one of the strongest economies in the nation. In fact, Texas' economy ranks 8th among all the nations in the world. It's valued at over $2.4 trillion. The Lone Star State added the most jobs in the nation over the last 12 months, almost 400,000. And the unemployment rate is holding steady at 4.1%. Because Texas has a low tax burden for businesses, it's home to dozens of multi-billion-dollar corporations that employ hundreds of thousands of residents. So why are Texans so worried about inflation? Well, the cost of food, housing, and other necessities in the state rose at a slightly faster pace than the rest of the country. The median household income and per capita income are lower in Texas than the national average. And while 11% of the U.S. lives below the poverty line, 14% of Texans do, despite the state's historically low cost of living. Inflation has slowed over the past year. However, the amount of Texans reporting they feel very stressed about it remains above 50%.
Well, as you just heard, people don't feel good about the economy right now. But here in Texas, a recession isn't projected in the near future. According to a report by the Texas Comptroller's Office, at the end of this budget cycle, the state is expected to have an $18 billion surplus and nearly $24 billion in the rainy day fund. CBS News Texas political reporter Jack Fink spoke with Texas Comptroller Glenn Hagar about these projections, the budgetary impact of the November constitutional amendments approved by Texas voters, and his office's effort to tamp down on organized retail theft. Here's a look at some of their conversation.
Texas, we're very fortunate. The economic growth that we're having in the state, we've had substantially over the last decade plus and predicted to continue. Obviously, the business climate, people want to continue to move to Texas every morning. When we wake up in Texas, we have roughly another 1,300 people that call Texas home every day, which is just hard to imagine. I challenge people to think about that for the next week. I mean, the point is all these people want to move here for an economic opportunity. Half of those roughly are moving to Texas. Half of those are growth in the state, natural growth, births minus deaths. But then also you have businesses that are wanting to relocate, set up headquarters in Texas. So all of that growth has principally in part driven the economic opportunities in Texas.
Let's talk about the November election. Texas voters approved most of the constitutional amendments, and they created a lot of different funds. We're talking about the Texas Energy Fund, the Water Fund, the fund for broadband, a fund for state parks, and also the university fund for research, plus a number of tax breaks for homeowners, child care facilities, and also manufacturers of medical and biological medical products. So I'm wondering, how are all those funded?
Yeah, great question. So as we were entering into this year, as the legislature was coming into the regular session, we had a record historical, unprecedented budget surplus, one that we had never seen. Just even the size and scope of Texas had paled in comparison in the previous years. So one of the points that I had made to the legislature, and leadership had continued to echo these same comments, is one, we need to make sure to provide relief to the taxpayer and property cuts, something that was significant, which was done in the November ballot as well as the legislature. And then also make sure that the good times that we're having right now in budget surpluses is not going to happen forever. There will be a recession at some point in our lifetime in the out years. And so therefore, the government's going to have to tighten its belt. So what you can do with these is use one-time type investments for road infrastructure, water infrastructure, electrical grid infrastructure, the things that you and I use on a daily basis, broadband infrastructure. If you go to certain parts of the state, you can't have this communication service that we're having today. And so those were the things that were on the constitutional amendment. The legislature was using part of that surplus that was bigger than the one we were just talking about, using those for one-time investments to invest in infrastructure and things that you and I can use today, and future generations will continue to benefit from and have greater economic opportunities in Texas as we have better road service, water service, broadband service, making sure our electric grid works, and investing in our university systems.
So you're saying that part of that $33 billion in the surplus that we had coming into this session was used for these funds specifically. So they're one-offs, right?
That is exactly correct. And that's why the legislature created them as one-offs. So therefore, they're not reoccurring. It's something that happens one time. The investment, as you mentioned, for example, that we just talked about as well, in our Texas park systems, $1 billion, which is just an astonishing amount of money. But we have a lot of great historical treasures in Texas, investing in those one time. So that's not something that will be reoccurring on all these different funds. So therefore, the legislature tried to make prudent actions to invest in Texas, but do it in a one-time situation to where we use that surplus, but we don't have to dip back into it again.
We're in the Christmas shopping season right now, and you see online various thefts where a whole bunch of people go in and loot a store. Is that happening in Texas, and what are you doing to prevent it?
Yeah, unfortunately, it is happening in Texas. And what we've seen is the legislature this last session had an effort to try to identify what do they need to do to take better actions. And so at the end of the day, what they did is they said, hey, Glenn Hager, will you create a task force on organized retail crime and put together a report for us as what is the issue here in Texas? Because we see this on TV more so in other states, but it actually is occurring here in the state of Texas. And so what you have is these kind of smash and grabs, these organizations, whether it's local gangs or international gangs that are moving from city to city, and they come in, they go into retail outlets. And really what part of the issue is it's also a safety issue for the people who are working in these stores and you and I who are the consumers in the stores, because the stores have seen violence rate tick up with these types of crimes and these types of robberies, and the ability to sell products online today compared to in the past has enabled these types of crimes even more than before. And so it has increased significantly, and it's an issue that we have got to address for the safety of our citizens and also making sure the safety of the people who are working in the stores.
Still ahead, we are getting an update on the plan to put a high-speed rail line between Dallas and Fort Worth. You're watching Eye on Politics. Welcome back, everyone. Will Texas be getting a passenger train connecting its major cities? Some are hopeful after the federal government awarded grant awards of $500,000 to multiple projects across the state. Among the groups to receive a grant, the North Central Texas Council of Government. The group has been planning for a line between Dallas and Fort Worth. Our Jack Fink recently spoke with the program manager of that for an update.
Since 2020, we initiated this study. We started in a phase one, where we really looked at an alternatives analysis between Fort Worth and Dallas on all the different routes our high-speed rail corridor could take. The intent has always been to connect it to the Dallas high-speed rail station that is planned as a part of the Dallas to Houston line. So you'd have a one-seat ride all the way from Houston to Dallas to Fort Worth. So in phase one, we looked at different alternative alignments. We also looked at different modes just to make sure high-speed rail was the appropriate mode for that corridor. We have confirmed with our policy board, the Regional Transportation Council for North Central Texas Council of Governments, that the alignment between Fort Worth and Dallas along the I-30 alignment is the one that is selected to move forward into the phase two analysis. That's where we are today. And the final part of the phase two analysis is to take this alignment and high-speed rail through the environmental analysis process. That's a federal process known as the NEPA process. That stands for National Environmental Policy Act. Once that's accomplished, then we have an environmentally cleared corridor that can move forward in the design process.
Now, under this plan, there would be a stop in Arlington, right? Because you've got the stadiums are there, you've got a lot of businesses going up there now, apartments, hotels, etc.
Exactly. Once we settled on the I-30 corridor, it made a lot of sense to have a station there here in Arlington along the I-30 alignment at pretty close to AT&T Way, which gives you direct access to the Cowboys Stadium, the Rangers ballpark, Six Flags, all the other elements here in Arlington that are, as you mentioned, continuing to grow and densify.
There has to be a feasibility study, I would imagine, as part of this, right? I mean, what's the cost? What's the potential ridership? How much time would it take from Dallas to Arlington to Fort Worth on any given day?
Feasibility analysis has really been baked into our phase one analysis that we accomplished. And in fact, I'd even say a lot of that effort started earlier. TxDOT, the transportation department for Texas, actually started a high-speed rail analysis between Oklahoma, Texas, really focused along the 35 corridor. And this is several years ago. And as a part of that analysis, they looked at Dallas, Fort Worth, Dallas to Fort Worth. Where should that alignment come through? How does it connect the two major metropolitan, or the two cities within this metropolitan area? From that, our study in phase one built on that. And in phase one, we were looking at travel times to be competitive with the automobile travel between Fort Worth and Dallas, which if you drive it in non-rush hour times, you're looking at 35 minutes, maybe along I-30. During rush hour, that balloons depending on traffic. It could be an hour, it could be an hour and a half, as we all well know, that travel that corridor. So for this to be feasible, really the project team, the RTC, would like this to be a part of this high-speed network nationally. So to get from Fort Worth to Dallas, we're looking at somewhere 30 minutes or less for travel time. The intent being, this isn't just a corridor to travel from Fort Worth to Dallas. We will catch some riders that way, but a majority of the ridership is likely going to be a part of this one-seat ride concept of going from Fort Worth to Houston. You just stay on the same train that stops in Dallas, maybe with a stop in Arlington, as you mentioned. That's really where we see the bulk of the ridership using this facility.
You have mentioned the Dallas to Houston, and yet that project, if I'm not mistaken, stalled for a time, and maybe Amtrak has helped it get back on track, so to speak, at least as far as the planning. So are you saying that the Dallas-Fort Worth is really contingent upon this Dallas-Houston route and perhaps a future route from South Texas through Fort Worth up to Oklahoma?
It's a great question. I would say yes, in a way. Our project is not contingent on just one opportunity in how to connect Dallas to Houston. So you mentioned Texas Central and their previous efforts, and they're still involved, as you mentioned, with now with Amtrak interested in that corridor. We think that high-speed rail just makes sense considering the growth in the state, the growth in our region, as an intercity option. So whether Texas Central and Amtrak put it together between Dallas to Houston, or whether another entity comes in if they're not able to get the ball across the goal line, we believe something's going to happen. Same thing on the Fort Worth to Austin, San Antonio side of things. So with that being said, our intent as a public organization is to make sure we have the connecting piece between Fort Worth and Dallas to connect to those two systems, those two statewide systems, at least environmentally cleared. It may not be built first. It could be built first if you desire to do that. We don't have high-speed rail, true high-speed rail built in the country yet. So building a 30-mile segment in Dallas-Fort Worth, the fourth largest metropolitan region in the country, connected to DFW Airport, which is the second busiest airport in the world, that would be a great showcase for, I believe, America to be able to say, look, we've actually stepped into the high-speed rail game.
Well, that's all for Eye on Politics. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm Ken Molestina. You're watching CBS News Texas.